Jealous of my daughter's inheritance, my mother-in-law spent years undermining me. "You'll never be good enough for this family," she hissed. But when she found out I was named trustee of the $4.6 million estate, her fake smile vanished. "So, this is a crazy one, but I really need some advice. I, 38 female, have been married to Derek, 40 male, for almost 15 years. His mom, Lorna, has always been extremely controlling and downright mean toward me, constantly undermining my parenting, our finances, and pretty much everything I did. I always tried to ignore it, for the sake of peace, but it was hard. Recently, Lorna got really sick, and to my shock, when her will was read, she had left everything, a $4.6 million estate, to my daughter, Madeline. Worse, she named me as the trustee of the estate, which is a huge responsibility. When Lorna found out, her whole demeanor changed. The woman who'd spent years making me feel like I was never good enough for her son or family now had to deal with me in charge of everything she had. Her fake smile vanished, and suddenly, the woman who'd been a thorn in my side for years was powerless. I'm trying to navigate all this. There's so much going on, family tension, guilt, and now the weight of this responsibility. Any advice on how to handle this? I'm not sure what to do next. It's funny how life can change in the blink of an eye. One minute, you're living a fairly normal, if complicated, life. The next, you're thrust into a situation you never saw coming. That's exactly how I felt when I found out about my mother-in-law Lorna's will. Before I get into that, let me give some context. I married Derek almost 15 years ago. We met at a friend's wedding, and we had this instant connection. We fell in love quickly. Everything seemed perfect, until I had to meet his family. Specifically, his mother, Lorna. Lorna had this way about her that made you feel like you were never quite good enough. She wasn't overtly rude or cruel, but there was a subtle, constant undercurrent of judgment. Every little thing I did seemed to rub her the wrong way, and she made sure I knew it. From the way I cooked to the way I raised our kids, nothing was ever quite right. I chalked it up to her being a little overbearing at first, but as the years passed, it became clear that Lorna's constant criticisms weren't just about me. They were about control. Lorna was the type of person who needed to be the center of attention. If there was a family event, she had to be involved in every decision. And when I say involved, I mean in control. It didn't matter how well-intentioned or capable I was, she always found a way to make me feel like I was falling short. Derek didn't really see it at first. He had grown up with Lorna's ways, and he didn't always recognize the subtle digs. But over time, even he started to see that her influence wasn't exactly healthy. The worst part was that she always did it with a smile, like she was doing me a favor by pointing out my flaws. It was suffocating. And then, I got pregnant. At first, I thought things might change. I hoped that Lorna's focus might shift to Madeline, our daughter. I thought, maybe now she'll soften. But no. If anything, Lorna became even more possessive. She started to undermine every decision I made with Madeline. When Madeline was a baby, Lorna would show up uninvited at our house, criticizing my parenting choices. She'd buy Madeline expensive gifts, and then, in front of Derek, she'd make these little jabs. You know, this is what every child needs. It's a shame Madeline doesn't have better toys. But, well, it's the thought that counts. And it wasn't just about things. It was about me, how I was raising my daughter, how I was managing my marriage. If I didn't meet her standards, she'd make sure I felt it. But the worst was when I overheard a conversation between her and Derek, one afternoon when Madeline was in her room playing. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I heard Lorna's voice, sharp and cold, from the living room. "You really think she's doing a good job with Madeline?" Lorna's voice wasn't raised, but the venom was unmistakable. "You know, you were raised with much higher standards, Derek. I just don't see her fitting in with this family. She'll never be good enough for us." I froze. It was like being punched in the stomach. It wasn't just a criticism of me, it was a direct attack on everything I had done for the last several years. Derek didn't say anything in response. I could hear the discomfort in his silence, and it broke my heart. When I confronted Derek later, he tried to brush it off. "You know how she is, babe. She's just old school." But I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. It wasn't just her comments, it was the way she had manipulated him, the way she had somehow inserted herself into every aspect of our lives. And now, she was doing the same with Madeline. But it didn't end there. In fact, it only got worse. Over the years, Lorna continued to play her game. She was present for every milestone in Madeline's life, making sure she was always at the center of attention, making sure she had the last word. Every birthday, every holiday, every graduation, Lorna would somehow find a way to undermine me, to make me feel like an outsider in my own family. And then, everything changed. Lorna had been getting sick for a while. It wasn't a sudden thing, she'd been battling a chronic illness for years, and recently, her condition worsened. We all knew it was serious, but the idea that she might be on her deathbed was something I couldn't bring myself to face. Derek, of course, was trying to be the dutiful son, but even he had to admit that something wasn't right. Lorna's health had been declining faster than anyone had expected. A few weeks before Lorna passed, Derek received a phone call from her lawyer. "We need to talk about the will," the lawyer had said. My heart sank. Lorna had always been incredibly secretive about her wealth. We didn't know much, only that she owned several properties, had investments, and was sitting on quite a bit of money. But no one, not even Derek, had any idea of the extent of her fortune. The lawyer went on, detailing the inheritance. Lorna had decided to leave her entire estate, worth a staggering $4.6 million, to Madeline. And, to my surprise, she named me as the trustee of the estate. At first, I didn't know how to feel. On the one hand, I was deeply uncomfortable. Lorna had spent years making me feel like I was an outsider, and now she was giving me control of everything she had? It didn't make sense. But at the same time, there was a strange sense of validation. After all the years of being belittled, after everything she had done to tear me down, now she had made me the person responsible for Madeline's future. It was a strange kind of power. When we told Lorna about the decision, I could see the shift in her expression. It was subtle at first, just a tightening around the edges of her smile. But as we spoke more about the terms of the inheritance, I could feel her unease growing. The next time I saw her in the hospital, the fake smile was gone. Her usual sharp, controlling nature had turned into a quiet resentment. I knew she wasn't happy about the way things had turned out. She wasn't in a position to argue, though, not with her health rapidly deteriorating. "You really think you can handle this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, but still laced with venom. "You'll never be good enough for this family. Not for Madeline, not for Derek, not for me." There it was again, the same words she'd used for years. But this time, they didn't hurt. This time, I felt no fear. "Actually, Lorna," I replied, my voice steady, "I'm more than capable. And I'll make sure Madeline has a future free from the kind of manipulation you tried to impose on us." Her gaze flickered for a moment, and for the first time, I saw her face crack. The woman who had spent so much of her life controlling everyone around her had no power left. She didn't say another word. The weeks after that were a blur. Lorna passed away quietly in her sleep, and suddenly, we were thrust into the responsibility of managing her estate. Derek and I worked through the details, with me as the trustee of Madeline's inheritance. But as the weight of Lorna's legacy pressed down on me, I couldn't help but feel the years of tension in our family had come to a head. The inheritance was more than just money, it was a symbol of everything Lorna had tried to control, and now, it was in my hands. I had a decision to make, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to carry it. The weight of Lorna's estate was heavier than I had anticipated. I knew the money itself wasn't the issue, it was the legacy that came with it, the years of manipulation and control that I would have to untangle. But more than that, it was the responsibility of taking care of Madeline's future. She was only 8 years old, and now, because of Lorna's will, everything she had was in my hands. As the trustee, I was legally bound to make decisions in Madeline's best interests. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it wasn't just about the money. Lorna's influence had lingered in every corner of our family for years. I knew that managing her estate was going to mean more than just signing paperwork and managing investments. It was going to be about managing the fallout, about navigating the tricky relationships that had been fractured long before Lorna's passing. Derek, as much as I loved him, was still reeling from his mother's death. He was torn between his grief for the woman who had raised him and the guilt he carried for not standing up to her more. It wasn't easy for him, but it wasn't easy for me, either. I had spent years in Lorna's shadow, never quite good enough in her eyes, and now I was the one holding the reins. We decided to sit down and go over the estate details together. Derek was trying to focus on the bigger picture, making sure we were doing everything right, making sure Madeline was protected. But it was hard. He was struggling with the same thing I had struggled with for years: how to deal with Lorna's overwhelming influence even in her absence. We would never have gotten through it without a solid plan in place, but that didn't mean the process was without its complications. There were the family members to consider. Derek's brother Michael, who was older and had always been more than a little jealous of Derek's relationship with Lorna, suddenly became involved in the process. Michael didn't take the news about Madeline's inheritance well. He called us up a few days after Lorna's funeral, his voice dripping with bitterness. "I can't believe this," Michael said, the phone crackling with his anger. "She named a child to inherit everything? A little girl who doesn't even understand what she's being handed?" I could hear Derek trying to calm his brother down, but I knew how Michael felt. He had always felt like he should have been the one in charge of the family's legacy. The idea that Lorna had passed the torch to Madeline, a child, was too much for him to accept. "You don't get it, Michael," Derek said, his tone flat but firm. "This wasn't about who deserves it more. This was about what Mom wanted for the family. She made her choices." I could hear the silence on the other end of the line. Michael didn't reply right away. Instead, there was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice tight with frustration. "I just don't know how you can sit there and accept this. I don't know how you're going to manage this without completely screwing everything up." I didn't let Derek say anything after that. I took the phone from him, my hands shaking with anger and frustration. "Michael, listen carefully. I'm Madeline's mother, and I will protect her. If you have a problem with how we're handling things, you can take it up with the lawyer. But I'm not going to sit here and let you accuse me of something I'm not doing. This is not about you, it's about Madeline." There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought I might have gone too far. But when Michael finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. "Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't say I didn't warn you." I hung up the phone and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that conversation sink into my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about family dynamics, about years of hurt that had never been addressed. And now, here we were, trying to sort through it all in the middle of an inheritance that no one in the family had expected. It wasn't just Michael who had a problem with the way things were going. Lorna's closest friends, people who had always been by her side, started making their opinions known as well. They would send us messages, little comments about how they thought the estate should be handled, about how Madeline should be guided in her inheritance, as if she were incapable of making her own decisions at 8 years old. At first, I tried to stay calm, to give them the benefit of the doubt. But the more they pushed, the more I felt the familiar sting of Lorna's manipulation. It wasn't just the money they wanted, it was control. They wanted to control Madeline, control her future, just like Lorna had tried to do with me for so many years. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the estate paperwork, Derek sat down beside me, looking worn out. I could see the exhaustion on his face. He was being pulled in so many directions, trying to keep the peace, trying to support me, trying to manage his grief. It wasn't fair to him, but I couldn't help but feel isolated. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, as though he could tell I was holding something back. I didn't say anything at first. I wasn't sure what to say. I was angry, hurt, and overwhelmed all at once. I wanted to tell him everything that had been building up inside me, the frustration with his family, the pressure I felt as the trustee, the guilt that weighed on me, knowing that Madeline's future was now in my hands. But I didn't want to burden him more than he already was. I simply nodded and forced a smile. "I'm fine," I said, though I wasn't. "Just a lot to figure out." Derek reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "You don't have to do this alone, you know that, right?" I nodded again, but deep down, I felt the distance growing between us. It wasn't just about Lorna's will, it was about the years of unspoken resentment, the constant undermining of my every move, and the fact that Derek had never fully understood how much Lorna's behavior had hurt me. He loved his mother, and I couldn't expect him to turn on her, not after everything she'd done for him. But I couldn't ignore the resentment that had been building inside me for so long. As I sat there, the weight of everything pressing down on me, I knew the situation wasn't just about the estate or even about Madeline's inheritance. It was about the legacy Lorna had left behind, one of control, manipulation, and jealousy. And now, as the one who held the keys to Madeline's future, I had to figure out how to break that cycle. As the days dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was hanging by a thread. The pressure from Derek's family, his brother, Michael, and Lorna's close friends, grew stronger with every passing day. They tried to push their way into the process of managing the estate, offering unsolicited advice, questioning my decisions, and trying to subtly insert themselves into Madeline's future. But what they didn't realize was that I was no longer the woman they had undermined for years. I wasn't the shy, insecure woman who had been afraid to assert herself. I had grown, and I was ready to stand up for what was right, for my daughter, for my family, and for myself. The more they tried to meddle, the more determined I became to prove them wrong. One afternoon, after yet another tense conversation with Michael, I decided I couldn't keep letting them walk all over me. I wasn't going to play Lorna's game anymore, or anyone else's. This estate, this inheritance, wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity, and the future of the one person who mattered most, Madeline. I started to make some changes, quietly but confidently. I hired a lawyer to oversee everything, ensuring that the management of the estate was handled properly, with no room for anyone to try and influence the process. I also set up a trust for Madeline, one that would keep her inheritance safe until she came of age, making sure that no one could touch it or control it. If anyone wanted to challenge the way things were being handled, they'd have to go through legal channels, and I wasn't about to back down. The next time Michael tried to confront me about the estate, I was ready. We were sitting in Derek's office, where Michael had decided to show up unannounced, as usual. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he paced back and forth. "You can't just keep doing whatever you want," Michael said, his voice tinged with anger. "You've taken everything Mom worked for, and now you're going to decide how Madeline spends it. She's a child. She doesn't even understand what any of this means." I didn't flinch. I met his gaze, calm and steady. "You're right, Michael," I said. "She's a child. And I'm doing what's best for her. I'm making sure her future is protected, that she won't have to deal with the same manipulation and control that you and Mom tried to impose on me." Michael opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off before he could get another word out. "This isn't just about the money. You and Lorna made sure to insert yourselves into every aspect of my life for years. You tried to make me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I wasn't capable. But now, I'm in charge. Madeline's future is in my hands, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else mess with that." There was a long silence as Michael processed my words. I could see the storm of emotions crossing his face, confusion, anger, disbelief. But something else was there, too, a flicker of realization. He had never seen me like this before. I wasn't backing down. Finally, Michael exhaled sharply, like he was letting go of something. "Fine," he said. "Do whatever you want. But don't say I didn't warn you." "I won't," I replied, my voice cold and firm. "But I don't need your warnings, Michael. I'm doing what's right for Madeline, and I'll do it on my terms. If you don't like it, that's your problem." He didn't argue any further. Instead, he stood up, his shoulders stiff, and walked out of the room without another word. That conversation marked a turning point for me. The floodgates had opened, and I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. I realized that, for so long, I had been waiting for permission, waiting for people like Lorna and Michael to give me the validation I thought I needed. But I didn't need their approval. I had my own strength. I had my own voice. From that day on, I took full control of the estate. I worked with a team of financial advisors, making sure everything was properly managed and invested. I made it clear to everyone that I would not be swayed or manipulated by anyone's opinions. The money would be handled with care, and Madeline's inheritance would be used wisely, without interference. But the real revenge came not in the way I handled the money, but in the way I handled my relationship with Derek's family. I stopped trying to win their approval. I stopped seeking their validation. I became the strong, confident woman that I had always wanted to be, and the one that Madeline deserved to look up to. When Derek finally saw the changes in me, he couldn't help but respect it. He had always been torn between his loyalty to his mother and his love for me, but he began to see that I had been right all along. Lorna had controlled everything for so long, and it was time for me to take the reins. He stood by me as I made the decisions I knew were best for Madeline, even if it meant distancing ourselves from his family. As time passed, I realized that I had finally taken control of my life. I wasn't just a passive participant in this family's drama. I was an active force, a protector, a mother, and I was doing what was best for my daughter, no matter what anyone else thought. One day, about a year after Lorna's passing, Derek and I sat down to talk about everything that had happened. The tension in our relationship had eased, and I could see the respect in his eyes. He had come to understand just how hard things had been for me, how much I had sacrificed to keep the peace with his family. But most importantly, he saw that I had done it all with the intention of protecting our daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "You've handled everything with grace, and you've done it for Madeline. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." I smiled softly, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Thank you. I'm just glad we're finally on the same page." We spent the rest of the evening talking about our plans for Madeline's future. I made it clear that I would continue to manage her inheritance with care, but I also made sure that Madeline knew the importance of hard work and humility. She would never grow up entitled or spoiled, not as long as I had anything to say about it. In the end, the money didn't matter as much as the lessons we had learned. Lorna's attempts to control me, to make me feel small, had only made me stronger. She had thought she could ruin me, but instead, she had inadvertently given me the power to reshape my life, to build a future for my daughter that was free from her influence. And that was the sweetest revenge of all.